A ceasefire has been announced to stop a bitter conflict over one of the most beautiful places on earth. Kashmir has repeatedly been troubled by a dispute dating back nearly 8 decades between India and Pakistan. Will the latest truce resolve differences going back to colonial times? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Now, after 4 days of their most fierce military conflict between them this century, nuclear-armed neighbours India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. Tensions soared on Tuesday when India attacked areas inside Pakistan it claimed sheltered armed groups. That's after 26 tourists were killed in Indian-administered Kashmir last month. India has accused Pakistan of backing the gunmen, a claim Islamabad denies. Why has the Kashmir region been a source of hostility between the two countries since independence from British rule in 1947? How far can colonial legacy be blamed for the conflict? And what lies ahead? We'll raise these questions with our distinguished panel of experts. But first, Hamza Mohammed has this report.
A beautiful land, but long contested and deeply scarred by decades of conflict. The roots of the Kashmir dispute go back to 1947, when the Indian subcontinent under the British colonial rule was partitioned into India and Pakistan. Kashmir was then ruled by a Hindu king, but with a Muslim majority population, he had to choose which country to join. King Hari Singh initially decided to remain independent, but under pressure from tribal fighters backed by Pakistan, he chose India. That decision led to Pakistani tribesmen invading the territory and the monarch calling on India for help, leading to the first war between India and Pakistan. The UN then brokered a ceasefire and divided Kashmir into one part administered by India, the other by Pakistan. New Delhi granted Indian-administered Kashmir a semi-autonomous status. But that did not end the violence. The region has seen 2 more wars, years of armed insurgency and many lives lost. India considers Kashmir to be part of its territory. Pakistan says its people should have the right to self-determination, something the UN once promised in a referendum that's yet to be held.
The politics is the art of possible, and to that extent I am happy to say that the special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir has been finally recognized.
The stakes were raised in 2019 when India revoked Kashmir's semi-autonomous status, tightening control and drawing renewed anger from both Pakistan and many Kashmiris.
Kashmiris are very tired of is repression and state control on both sides. They want to live with dignity without fear and without presence of militaries on both sides.
With generations growing up in conflict, Kashmir remains volatile, its future uncertain, and its people caught in the crossfire between its 2 nuclear-armed neighbours. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us from London, Victoria Schofield, British biographer and historian, and author of books on Kashmir, including Kashmir in the Crossfire. From New Delhi, Radha Kumar, an author and academic. In 2010, she was one of the 3 government-appointed members of a panel representing the views of Kashmiri society to India's Cabinet Committee on Security. And in Somerville, USA, Ayesha Jalal, a Mary Richardson professor at Tufts University and expert on South Asian history. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start perhaps with Radha in New Delhi. So Radha, is this ceasefire an opportunity to try and actually address the underlying issues of conflict here?
First of all, let me say how glad I am that there is a ceasefire. And I do hope that it will lead to talks on a series of issues. I see that President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio say that there are going to be talks in a neutral or a third-party venue on a broad set of issues. What they are has not been announced, and we don't know. We can assume that for sure there will be talks on how to make the ceasefire long-lasting, possibly even permanent. There will be talks on what to do to control, if not entirely eradicate, terrorism.
So, Ayesha, do you see any indications that diplomacy is moving in that direction, a direction of actually setting up a process to address the underlying issues that cause this conflict to break out?
I tend to agree that while we have to be grateful for a ceasefire, and we must thank the American administration for that, in terms of it was very badly needed. But I'm not so sure that we can expect any kind of move immediately, certainly towards resolution. But, these two neighbors haven't been speaking to each other since 2019. And it's absolutely essential that they develop mechanisms so that they are not forced to go to war because of an incident of terrorism in Kashmir or vice versa. So I think that's the least I can expect are mechanisms to be put in place that will make the two talk, at least to prevent conflict. Whether that talking can eventually lead to serious negotiations on Kashmir, I don't know. I doubt it. But I certainly think that two nuclear states need better mechanisms to prevent conflict from escalating the way it has. So I think that is my least expectation out of these talks, should they take place.
I think most people would probably agree on that point, that they don't want to see nuclear states go to war. Victoria, there are a lot of issues that need to be sorted out, but it's the basic one, the status of Kashmir, and that is something that goes back to British rule. Is this basically a conflict born out of the colonial legacy?
Well, I think you can put it that way. And firstly, I'd like to say I'm also very relieved there's a ceasefire. And I agree with Ayesha that I think it's far too early days to think that we're going to go from ceasefire to sense prevailing that they have to sit down and discuss fully what we would call the core issue, the Jammu and Kashmir issue. I think, unfortunately, given that the issue would never have arisen, for example, had there not been partition, but given there was partition, both states wanted to incorporate the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir within their borders, and neither has succeeded in doing so in its entirety. And I would just like to quickly make this important point, is that we do tend to talk about Kashmir as though it's one homogeneous region, but it isn't. And as we know, and as we heard in the introduction, it's been de facto divided for over nearly 80 years. 1/3 approximately is retained and administered by Pakistan, 2/3 by India. But they're very different regions. You've got Ladakh, which really is, it's politically part of Kashmir, although the Indian government now calls it the Union Territory of Ladakh, into which it includes Gilgit-Baltistan, again, a very different region. And so when you're talking about resolution, you have to realize that it's not just a simple question of the Valley of Kashmir, what's going to happen to the Valley of Kashmir. It's what's going to happen to all these different regions, Gilgit-Baltistan, Ladakh, Jammu, the Valley of Kashmir, and the small slither of land, which the Pakistanis call Azad, Free Jammu and Kashmir, which the Indians call Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, and which they claim is also part of Jammu and Kashmir under India.
All right, so a lot of territory to break down there, and we don't want to run the risk of either oversimplifying things nor complicating it too much that we lose people. But Radha, can we break it down to a basic question that has long been put out there on the political horizon, why does India not hold a referendum as referenced in documents by the UN Security Council like Resolution 47? Wouldn't that resolve the thing, this issue? Let the people in all of those regions which Victoria was talking about, let them decide where they want to go.
I think there are 2 or 3 separate points there. First of all, as you must be aware, the UN resolutions included the call for Pakistani troops and tribals to withdraw from Kashmir before any referendum or plebiscite could be held, which the Pakistani administration refused to do. So that pretty much put paid to whatever the UN was seeking. I would only say 2 things. History is not always ever present. Much has changed since those days. We've had several peace processes and, in fact, discussions on how to reach a resolution, the most recent of which was the Musharraf Vajpayee and then the Musharraf Manmohan Singh set of negotiations. And in both of those, a solution emerged, which was partly similar to the kind of solution that emerged for Northern Ireland. In other words, it was a solution which went for maximum autonomy in all parts of the former princely state, which Victoria has listed, that the armed groups would enter into a DDR, demobilization, demilitarization process, and that the various parts would be allowed some degree of freedom of movement between themselves, that they might be able to jointly develop their resources, which, by the way, would include the now contested waters issue, and that perhaps India and Pakistan would give security guarantees. That was the framework that emerged in 2006, 2007, which was unfortunately put on the back burner. But it was also, as in Northern Ireland, something that was discussed over the years. And it remains still, to my mind, the most feasible and the most viable solution.
Let me take some of those points then to Ayesha, Jalal. Is there a lack of political will, perhaps on the side of both countries, to try and resolve this? Radha mentioned the 2006 initiative. She also referenced Section A1A of the UN Security Council resolution that called for the withdrawal of Pakistani troops. We should also remember Section A2A, which calls for the withdrawal of Indian troops to a bare minimum to support civil power. Is this a case of really neither side having the political will to see this through?
Absolutely. I think that the political economy of continuing conflict is much stronger than the political economy for peace. And so, yes, the lack of political will has been the primary factor. I mean, there's no lack of ideas of how a solution could be implemented. I mean, one has been mentioned that Musharraf and Vajpayee were talking, but there are many others. It's just that there's nobody really interested in going ahead and solving the issue once and for all, because Kashmir has a hugely important role in the politics of both countries. It's emotive. And I think that one thing that is missing is that this is not an India-Pakistan issue only. There is a Kashmiri issue as well. Victoria's pointed out to the heterogeneity of the region. And so it's a complex situation and can only be done through some kind of a process whereby confidence-building measures can help people talk to each other, both within Kashmir, both Kashmirs, Pakistani-occupied, Indian-occupied. But I don't think the will is there to move. And so I would go back to my earlier comment that we need, at the very least, mechanisms that will prevent these two countries from escalating to this degree until a resolution can be reached, which I think, certainly I don't see it happening in my lifetime.
Right. All right. This might be a good point, a good time to try and bring into perspective what happened in 2019 when things took another huge development. Article 370 of the Indian Constitution was revoked. Now, that gave Indian-administered Kashmir limited autonomy. It allowed the state administration to make its own laws in all matters except finance, defense, foreign affairs and communications. That special status also allowed for a constitution and a flag. It enabled legislators to grant special rights and privileges to permanent residents of the state in both Muslim-majority Kashmir and Hindu-dominated Jammu regions. The clause also barred Indians from outside the state from buying property and settling there. All right, let's bring Victoria back into the discussion. So, Victoria, when you look at that kind of development, does that not indicate that the central government in New Delhi is moving further and further away from the idea of allowing a referendum at any point? This is not simply about whether or not Pakistani troops and tribesmen withdraw according to a Security Council resolution. There's been a movement to try and cement and absorb Kashmir into India.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And I was hoping we would be talking about that because going back to talking about Musharraf and Manmohan Singh and the peace process that was initiated at that time, India's action in 2019, it's unilateral action. And as I mentioned, it created 2 union territories. It took away Jammu and Kashmir's status as a state and created these 2 union territories. But it didn't confine itself to creating union territories only on the area, the 2/3 of the state which it administered. It included, and if you look at the official map, which all embassies from India give to other embassies, it shows the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, including Azad, free, Pakistan occupied, however you like to call it, Kashmir, and then Ladakh joined together with Gilgit-Baltistan. So we're a long way. We've moved even further from the idea that there could be this sort of separate entities with their separate autonomy. But I also do want to mention that the autonomy was very prized. It was more in terms of its status because it had been actually gradually eroded since the 1950s. The flag had remained, but very little else in terms of the authority was still with the Kashmiris. But the most important aspect which had remained was the supplementary Article 35A, which was the demographic article. And that's what protected local Kashmiris from having non-Kashmiris come and buy property. And that's what has been systematically undertaken since 2019, is bringing in non-Kashmiris and giving them, so to speak, citizenship so that they can buy territory in Kashmir.
So, Victoria, essentially, this is an attempt, you're saying, to try and change the demographic balance there in favour of the Hindu population.
They're a long way yet from that because, of course, it was, in the old days, we used to talk about Kashmir being 75% Muslim. That is what it was initially. But it's the implication, and this is what has created a lot of hostility and a lot of resentment. It may be sullen, quiescent resentment, but certainly that resentment at what is being done and altering, as you say, the demographics.
Okay, let me bring Radha back into the discussion. I think where we're going, Radha, is we have to ask the question, is what's happening and the changes which have been happening in Kashmir actually part of a bigger issue, and that is the rise of right-wing Hindu supremacist politics. When you look at statements that were made, for example, like the Sweden-based VDEM Institute in its democracy report in 2023, it talks about India as one of the worst autocratizers in the last 10 years. Freedom House report of 2022 speaks about the BJP presiding over a persecution of Muslim population. The Economist Intelligence Unit in 2021 talking about democratic backsliding and crackdowns. Is Kashmir part of this bigger picture as we see more of a rise in nationalist politics, that there is an attempt to suppress the, if we can call it, the identity of the others?
Well, let me make several points on this. First of all, as far as the 2019 events of reading down of Article 370, dividing Kashmir and taking away its statehood are concerned, I'm actually somebody who not only opposed it from the start, but was in court opposing it. And what's more, I founded the Forum for Human Rights in the wake of that for Jammu and Kashmir, because I felt that local civil society groups no longer had the freedom to report on those. And until they would have the freedom again, it seemed to me it was important that the rest of us must do it. And now, having said all of that, I can also mention to you that when you asked me this question about what Hindu nationalists they're called, I prefer to call them Hindu chauvinists, are concerned, yes, the removal of Article 370 was in successive BJP manifestos. And so you can say that they went ahead and unilaterally fulfilled that pledge without consultation, without discussion, and so on. And I hope very much that we will be able to revoke that situation or turn it back. On backsliding, in fact, I've discussed this at considerable detail in my book that came out last year called The Republic Relearned. But I'm also talking there about fight back from more democratic political parties, which I believe is ongoing as we speak. And I have hopes that we will re-democratize, so to speak, in the coming years. That might come at the level of states to start off with before it reaches the center or the union. But it is happening. And I'll also say that I have seen Kashmiri political parties make common cause with other state parties and leaderships to talk about the need for federalizing India further. Indeed, I have even heard some of them talk about making common cause over the issue of federalism as a form of autonomy. So I think there are a lot of very imaginative initiatives underway at the moment over here in India. I wish that we were able to have more news of what is happening in Gilgit-Baltistan or Pakistani-held Kashmir. Perhaps it's just sitting in India, I'm not getting the news. I would have liked to have known more about whether there is any forward movement over there on, release of political prisoners or grant of federal rights and political and human rights there. As you may remember, during the high years of the peace process from 2002 to 2013 between India and Pakistan, the Kashmiris were critical stakeholders. The Hurriyat played a very important role in that peace process. And it was the first time, actually, that there was a recognition that people from Pakistani-held Kashmir and from Gilgit and Baltistan had an important role to play and had to be consulted on how this peace process should progress.
Okay,
so when I talked about autonomy on various sides, that was very much out of a process of consultation amongst
Understood. Sorry, Radha. Let me jump in because we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to try and squeeze in a time for an answer from Ayesha. Ayesha, looking forward, can this issue be resolved looking at the current state of play within both governments in India and Pakistan? I mean, there have been accusations, of course, towards Pakistan. It has its own challenges in terms of how it's been dealing with its balance of power and structure between the democracy, between the army, and accusations of radicalism and breeding radicalism. But also, on the other side, on the Indian side, you have a government that's led by a prime minister who is associated with groups like the RSS a Hindu group banned by the British and 3 post-independence governments over accusations of terrorism and violence. BJP parties whose members describe Muslims as a green virus and termites. Is the ground really fertile for these 2 governments to resolve this?
No, I mean, I've already said that I don't expect a solution to the Kashmir conflict, but I do expect mechanisms being put in place so that India and Pakistan don't come to blows so fast and so quickly with such dire consequences in the future. I think that there is a consensus in both countries on Kashmir. The opposition in India is certainly supporting the government, the incumbent government on this issue. So I don't see a breakthrough. I think they have to sort of really move towards some measure of normalization. Both India and Pakistan have, as I said, not been talking about anything. And now there's a complete suspension of everything. There's not even mail coming. There's not even, nothing is happening. No trade, nothing. Whatever, minimal trade takes place. So I don't really see this composition in India resulting in any real move either towards the kind of autonomy that Radha is talking about or the kind of freedom that I think people in Kashmir talk about. So unfortunately, I have very limited expectations, but given the scenario, I think they're realistic.
All right, realistic is a more positive word to end on than some of the thoughts we've been dealing with. So let's end on a slightly more positive word there and thank our guests very much, Radha, Victoria and Ayesha. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here. For now, it's goodbye.